Hello, family. How are you doing? This is your brother by Meradiso Gaia. Good evening to you all. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different tonight. But first, got to start off. Peace to you, peace to your home, peace to your family, peace to your community, peace to your ancestry, peace to my community, peace to my ancestry, peace to the nation that you are and they are building. Peace also to the Godic forces, the great spirit above, the mother below. This is Mtima Radi, everybody. Mtima Radi. So lightning. So, I'm going to be doing a little bit, something a little bit different tonight. I'm going to be jumping around a bit. So, the primary focus of this video is going to be to give you books. I'm going to give you a lot of books tonight, but I'm going to be shutting off the camera, turning it back on, so I can go over to my collection and extract the books that the ancestors need me to extract instead of just bringing over a bunch of them and then having to put them back. Um, the reason for this book list tonight is different than in previous times. In previous times, I was trying to give you books that would help you understand Bobby Hemmett. One of the things that we have to kind of come to conclusion though is we can't stay stuck in the metaphysics. If the metaphysics isn't married to the physical, then the metaphysics is dead. Period. And in fact, I will tell you this, family, it's becoming increasingly clear, at least from the standpoint of the ancestors, that what we used to teach in our schools, hear what I just said, what we used to teach in our schools when we were supposedly segregated and we were worse off than the white man, part of the instruction that was given in our schools had to do with the metaphysics and had to do with actually mirroring and I'm sorry, not mirroring it, but marrying it to the physical. This is how we were able to create constantly and consistently with the supposed intellectual garbage that we were given from the other side of the track, from the white community. This is also what we used to teach in our churches. Our churches weren't regular churches, family, and sometime in the next couple of years I'm going to have a deep discussion with you on that. Our churches weren't just churches. Did you hear what I just said? Our churches weren't just churches. Our churches were ancestral sanctuaries. They were ancestral sanctuaries. Now, the word sanctuary for us is different from what it meant to them, to white folks. A sanctuary for them is a place where you can find protection, and they've needed it. Looking at their history in Europe, they've needed places where you can find protection when you're being persecuted, or you could find protection from the damnation of regular life, because of in Europe they didn't treat everybody equally. Unless you had money, you weren't anything. Whereas the sanctuary for us was massively different. Our sanctuaries didn't give protection. I mean, white people could come into our churches and do whatever they wanted to. That's because it was their creation. So our sanctuaries were places where we could recharge, we can revitalize ourselves, just like the African drum circle was that. It was also a place where if you knew what you were doing, you can get in contact with your other side. And very, very few people in the church had that ability, and very few people had that gift. But when we talked about prophets in our churches, we were literally talking about people who could talk to the other side. It wasn't like prophets of this age, which are people who purport to be able to talk to the other side. Some of them actually can, but a lot of the people who are talking, they don't understand that they're talking to utilize a European term. They're talking to demons and devils. They're talking to the lower realm entities that can manipulate and get off on manipulating people. So if there is no marriage, if there's not a marriage between the metaphysics and the physical, or the metaphysics and the physics, then your metaphysics is a waste of time. It's wasteful. You are spending your time doing nothing. And this is one of the problems that we have not been willing to address. This is one of the primary things that I found myself disagreeing with Bobby Hemmett early in his lectures. That while yes, it was his lectures were about emphasizing the metaphysical, he kept pointing out that we shouldn't care about this world, that we should just, pray for the destruction of this world. And that used to make me massively angry, because internally I understood that's not what we were here for. That is not what we were here for. To give up on this planet is to give up on the Most High. To give up on the Most High is to give up on our ancestry, because all three of those things are connected. When we say the Most High, we are talking about our higher self that is above our higher self. And as we move our higher self down into our physical being, we are then coming into contact with the higher self, which is above that higher self. And that higher self, which is above that higher self, is the higher self, which is always in residence around the ancestors. So therefore, it's essentially an antenna. It is a connection. It is that silver cord that I've talked about before that goes to the other side and connects us to that other side. It pulls in energy, pulls in emotions, pulls in motions, pulls in thoughts, pulls in speech, pulls in action. It's big, family. So to say that the earth doesn't matter is to forget that the earth is a reflection of something higher that has slipped lower. The earth has a soul. Yes, it does. We have a soul. The difference between Earth's soul and our soul is Earth's soul lives in this cocoon of time, which only elevates and ascends as its creatures who are connected to its consciousness and its soul elevates and descends. Our soul isn't tethered to this time, whereas Earth's is. That is the key point that we don't seem to get, is Earth is tethered to this. We have to transform time. We have to transform time. We have to transform how time interacts with space, and we have to transform how those elements interact with willpower, which comes from us, and then how willpower interacts with the omniforce. And the omniforce interacts with time and space. It's a circle. Now, there's other things in between there, but that's what you need to understand. That's where we're at. If we don't elevate, the earth can't elevate. We are the actors that are enabling earth to elevate, just like there were actors here that enabled earth's soul to fall. So if we are constantly studying metaphysics and we are not putting that metaphysics into action on the realm, this is why I think Dr. Ben and them, and I give Dr. Ben some credit, man, because Dr. Ben, I think to use the military term, I think he mind fucked people like Phil Valentine. I really do. I think he mind fucked them. They came to Dr. Ben, they came to the others, and they said, you know something, we want to know about this. And he said, you ain't ready. And he put the idea in their head, because young people, you tell them they ain't ready for something, that they can't do something, they're gonna have one or two reactions. The first reaction is they're gonna cuss you out and go off and lick their wounds and be pissed at you for the next 50 years, or they're gonna say, "Oh, we really ain't ready." Huh. I'm showing you, old man. Let me show you. And I think that's actually part of what happened, is he gave them that. At the same time, it was a test and it was a challenge by the ancestors to make them see what was missing in the metaphysical concepts, which they were actually doing massive research on. Don't forget, family, the research, most of the research, and this is finally starting to change, may I say, but a lot of the research came from white scholars. If our schools were teaching metaphysics, which I really believe our schools were teaching in many aspects, metaphysics married to the physical, because we don't tend to separate those things, do we? No, we don't. But if our schools were teaching that, and now we see that Dr. King's statement about us integrating into a burning house, because we see that the European schools were not teaching metaphysics. Now, by the way, this was not always the case, family. There's a book, I don't have the hard copy version of it. It's called The Underground History of Public Education by John Taylor Gatto. You should get that book. There was once upon a time when there was a metaphysical essence. If it wasn't outright stated, they would call it religiosity back then. But there was a metaphysical essence which was taught in the lessons that parents were giving to their children. Now, I believe that most of this came from the interactions with the Moors. I believe that. I also believe it came from long held traditions in Europe that hadn't been broken up yet by economic forces or church forces. But either way, in the earlier days of the United States of America as a republic, there was this metaphysical essence which was passed on from parent to child. With the advent of European public education, because don't forget the Moors introduced as part of the Enlightenment, they introduced the right to education and they introduced public education to Europe. Oh yeah, that was the Moors. That was black people who did that, family. This is why we are so much for public education. The problem is we don't see yet that public education is a problem, that the European public education system is not similar to or anywhere an offshoot from, except for the fact that it's public, from the public educational institutions that were established by the Moors. We think in our hearts of hearts that this is a offshoot of that. We don't understand that their public education system has always been devoid of spirituality and metaphysics. Whereas our educational system, when we were in true control of our educational facilities always had interwoven into it the metaphysics. This is why the best black schools in the white community today, your best black schools in the white community, they're great with producing people who can do all kinds of scientific and, white things. But when you start talking to them about deeper spiritual issues and metaphysics, they look at you like you're crazy. Because our schooling systems had that essence. It had that spiritual essence. It had that metaphysical essence. It had that metaphysical genetics in it. Whereas theirs is devoid of spirituality. It is devoid of metaphysics. It is devoid of the great secret of life, the essence, the willfulness, all of it. It is devoid of that. And that is one of the reasons why the society is in the shape that it's in. Family, if it wasn't for us holding fast to a vision all of those years, if it wasn't for us, and I did a video about this and I didn't actually post it. I should probably, find it and post it. But if it wasn't for us holding fast to the vision, and even presently, if it wasn't for us holding fast to the vision of freedom and liberty and democracy and hope and equality and all of this stuff, if it wasn't for us and the fact that our educational practices were all about the metaphysics, it was all about the morality, which is one thing that I've always disagreed with Bobby Hammond. I know now where he gets that from. He gets it from the psychopath in training, and the reformed psychopath, Aleister Crowley, who had a problem with morality. But if it wasn't for us, and the reason why I call him a psychopath in training, and really he's a reformed psychopath in training, there you go, is because he's still, like, when you look at him, you could tell that he was still very hollow, but he was trying to feel his way out of that darkness. What did Tupac say about, you look into the eyes of a crackhead, that's eternal fire? You look into his eyes and you could tell that there was some eternal fire in there. You know what I'm saying? But because we did this, because we held that powerful vision for equality and freedom and liberty and all that, because we did it, this country wasn't allowed to slip into the abyss. This country was not allowed to slip into the abyss because we have lost that. And family, I want to ask you to do me a big favor. Get an old dictionary, Funks and Wagner dictionary from the 1950s, the 1930s. Get yourself a Random House dictionary. I'm actually about to buy a couple more dictionaries in the next 2 months. Big time dictionaries. And look up the word hope. And familiarize yourself with hope, because family, we used to have hope, and hope is not what you think it is. Trust me when I tell you that. I was shocked when I found out what hope was. We used to have hope. And I give a shout out to my brother Dana Stevens right now, who I was watching a video of his about a week ago, and he was somewhat talking about this, how black people don't have hope. Hope, just like optimism and realism, Optimism being, if I'm not mistaken, your left eye. Realism being your right. No, optimism. Yeah, optimism is your left eye, and realism is your right eye, if memory serves me correctly. Um, with hope, you can actually project a vision and believe that it's going to come up, that it's going to happen, even if everything around you says it's not going to happen. We were able to do that. So we kept this country from sliding into the abyss. We kept the whole Western civilization from sliding into the abyss. That's what we did. But family man, we have been in it for so long. We have been in it for so long that we have lost the hell. To be honest with you, it's not just because we've been in it for so long. It's because they have manipulated us into losing it. They have manipulated us into losing it. The music that you're listening to is, it explodes your vibratory frequency. It explodes your aura if you don't place it correctly. And most of us, we don't think when we're listening to music. We don't place it correctly, so it explodes us. We don't look at it as something that's going to just root us into the present. So we don't look for the underlying rod, if I can call it that, the underlying rod. We listen to it and we absorb it all. So it becomes a part of our being when we ain't supposed to do that. Music is supposed to root you. If it is high enough, if it is high enough in the frequency channels, if its vibratory frequency is high enough, then you can absorb it. And you always want to shoot for something that is about making love, family. You always want to shoot for. So if you listen to music and it's about making love, I ain't talking about having sex, family. I'm talking about making love. You can make love without ever taking your clothes off. That's what making love is about. When you finally do get to that level where you're taking your clothes off, man, making love is powerful because it resets your whole vibratory frequency. It resets the atmosphere in your home. It resets the atmosphere in your community. That's what making love is about. And even when you are together and you're not in your clothes and you're making love, that comes from the heart and it accelerates upward. So you can absorb energy, you can absorb music that is doing that, only to reinforce the fact that you are capable of making love. Now, whenever you have some type of music that is below that, then you do not want to absorb it all. Yes, have fun with it, enjoy it. You can even dance to it, but keep it into perspective. This is something that's going to root you in the present. That's the only job of it. This is why most of us, we listen to music that has nothing to do with making love. It's supposed to keep us rooted into the present, but we become harder as we listen to it because we absorb it. We become harder as we listen to it because we absorb it. So then we get cut off from our spiritual essence because we are dealing with music that is in the first or second chakra in its vibratory frequency, because that's what the music industry is creating to keep you locked down. Remember, Professor Griff said this back in the 1990s. He said it, late 1990s too. He said they were going to create music that keeps you locked into your lower chakras. He wasn't lying. We are listening to music right now. A lot of this mumble rap, family, is in the subterranean level. And I'm not talking about positively either. There is at least two chakras that go below your root chakra. And I'm not talking about your knees or your feet either. I'm talking about these in subterranean. Um, Oftentimes, uh, because the yogis and stuff didn't ever really deal with them, they didn't write a lot on them, or maybe those texts just haven't been released to the public, more likely than not, or they've been lost. There were tons of stuff in Egypt that dealt with them, and those things have all been lost. Those things have all been lost. So we are dealing with music. Mumble rap is subterranean. It is below the feet. It is below the feet, and it is supposed to be below the feet because it's technically mirror imaging the chakra that I've heard many people call your soul chakra, which is above your head. And I'm not talking about the one that's part of your higher self. There's actually two above your head too, but it's supposed to mirror that. So the one above your head talks. How can I put this? It's mumbling, but it's audibly mumbling. So this is where you get your mantras. This is where you get your prayers. This is where you get those things that as you say them, it unifies your being and not emphasizes, but magnifies your light. It brightens your light. That's where you get those things from. It's above your head. It comes in through your crown chakra and down the rest of you. Um, this is mirroring that, because what this wants to do is this wants to sink you lower into the vibratory frequency of this lower realm. Now, this lower realm, when I'm talking about this lower realm, I ain't talking about the earth family. I'm talking about the earth has fallen into an atmospheric frequency, which is so far lower than it's supposed to be. So far lower than it's supposed to be. So we're listening to music that is meant to drive us lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. We have to break that. How do you break it? How do you break it? One, you start remembering and start reminding yourself that this music is just to root you in the present, and you release the rest of it. The music is only meant to root you in the present. The music is only meant to root me in the present, and release the rest of it. Release the rest of it. Don't absorb it. Don't absorb it. Don't absorb it. And then get back into the classics, family. Get back to the 70s, because see, if you go back to the 70s, and this is something that Bobby Hemmett mentioned, and I'll mention it now too because it's important. When they were putting things on vinyl, and family, I've been listening to a lot of jazz recently, and it's the Ancestors that got me away from jazz, because I was listening to jazz and I was getting stuck in the 60s and the 50s and the 70s because of the energy that was coming from it. You listen to it when they used to print the albums, it would literally take the energy that was involved in making that album. It would take energy that was involved in printing, the energy that was actually in the atmosphere at the time of the printing, and it would stamp it into that LP. And even when they were doing tapes, it still did the same thing. And so when you played it, and Bobby Hemmett again is the one that got me onto this. When you played it, you would actually get a projection, a changing of the vibratory frequency in the actual area, in the surrounding area. It would create an aura to the building that you were in and to whatever building happened to be playing it. This is why there was so much power in playing LPs over the radio, because it would change the vibratory frequency of whoever was playing it, and the entire room, the entire atmosphere surrounding that room, to match the time period. It would match the time period that album was originally cut. Now, this is even more fascinating when you consider that the role that you played. Oh, this was powerful, family. The role that you played was, how was that energy to be translated? So if you were the solar plexus or higher, you would be considered on the acceleration track. So you would be considered more of an well, not really an optimist. What's the word I'm looking for? You would be considered kind of positively charged, if we say. So your ability to get the vision portion of the album that was represented by or represented in that time. So you basically, the moral, the higher moral, the higher vision that I was talking about earlier, it would be there for you to be able to tap into, and you would then be able to draw that down. You would be able to pull that into yourself, and you yourself would then be able to try to craft the world according to that vision. So that higher vision principle that was there, in the 60s and in the 50s and in the 70s, when these things were being cut, you would be able to actually take that in, and that would actually influence. This is why a lot of people, you notice a lot of white kids, they go through a lot of trouble to get their hands onto old vinyl records because that's where the energy is. This is why they are playing the classics to death right now, because that's where the energy is. Now, if you are lower than the solar plexus, I'd say even, solar plexus was like the mid-level line. So really, if you were below the lower plexus, or the solar plexus, you would be on the lower end. You wouldn't be able to access that vision. You'd be able to tell that there is an energy there, but you wouldn't be able to access that vision. You wouldn't be activated enough to be able to take in that energy and then utilize it and then push it forward. This is why it's important to remember the optimist. The optimist is the right eye. The realist is the left eye, because the realist is the one that shows you not only the reality as it exists presently, but the cold reality, the underground reality. But it's also the one that shows you how to transfer that reality and how to transform that reality. Lisa Left Eye Lopez understood this because she was taught in the metaphysical arts of her captors. Now, understand. For the optimist is the exact opposite. It sees what, technically not the exact opposite, but sees what is always possible and sees what is always potential at a soul level, at a spirit level. It is the realist job to look, and the optimist is also what gives you the ability to visualize what is possible and what is always possible and what is a constant possible and a constant ability, or should I say, it is a constant possibility. It also gives you the means and the tools of making that a reality. So you can project a goal through your optimism, and then you can reach it through your optimistic lens. Now, the realist side will tell you, okay, this is how you realistically can get this done. This is how you can realistically get this done. And then this one is your intuitive. This is your clear vision. CLAIRE. That's your clear vision. And that unifies the two. That unifies the two in a very, very powerful way. In a very powerful way, which I will not get into presently. But we are in a we as black folks, we have lost a lot of this. We have lost a lot of these because we have been treated to a metaphysical diet of realism. We've been treated to a metaphysical diet of realism. And so when we've seen people, and I know this is going to go far beyond this list, but these are the two people that I could think of offhand. When we saw Nelly, when we saw Lisa Lopez, and I know there's others. I think Katy Perry actually had a video at one point where she was wearing something underneath her left eye. This was psychological. This was psychological preparation for us to accept realism. What does that mean? It was a psychological trick to get us to prepare ourselves to accept whatever the powers that be wanted to tell us happens, and it was also to demobilize us, or immobilize us, not demobilize us, even though technically it was to demobilize us also. But it was to immobilize us because this has always been part of our motivating force. So that is your spiritual sight. That is your soul's sight. These are always going to be physical, but this is your soul sight. When this is open, this clarifies these two and allows them to expand. Now, there are technically two other eyesights that we could talk about, one on the back of your head and one on the top of your head, but that's way too much, and I haven't even parsed that out yet. Family, they just introduced that to me a couple months ago. One of them, I think, a couple years ago, and it's still like mysterious to me, so I got to still parse that out. But if we shifted our allegiance from this to this is when people talk about us, black people being the consciousness of this country. We need to understand, son, family, they ain't crazy. They're not crazy. We are the consciousness of this country, and we hold that right here. We shifted our allegiance from this, to that one. to our left eye. And so we went from the spiritual knowledge, we went from spiritually seeing everything. And trust me when I tell you, I get it. They've beaten us into submission. They've given us crack. They've funded gang wars. They've given us the means and methods to kill ourselves. And then they themselves have enjoyed killing us. So I get it. I get it. The world is harsh and cold, and so we switched to this. But they didn't understand that by doing this, they were literally signing the death warrant of their own civilization, because we are the only thing that has been holding it up, and the ancestors are not in the business right now of propping it up anymore. Now, they weren't in the business before anyway. They stopped being in the business to do the with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Assata Shakur, a bunch of the others who were murdered and killed and exiled. Not all of them, by the way. Some of them, a lot of them, no. And this includes Che Guevara. When they realized, and a number of people who were on the stage during that time period when you seem to have even the political world turning radical, because even they had people there in those positions ready to shape the world anew. When they realized that people like Robert Kennedy were going to be killed, that people like Janis Joplin and oh my God, what is his name? I am so embarrassed right now. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, family. I'm so embarrassed. Let Jimi Hendrix. There you go. Um, so when they realized that that all these people were getting killed, and that this was a liquidation of these kind of spiritual celestial assets, they turned against this whole project. They turned against it, and they were, there was still work going on to try to rescue it, but the majority of the ancestors said, it's time to start extracting them out of there. It's time to start getting them out of there. So when they started killing, and they started this in the 50s and the 40s, when they started killing our spiritual sight, they started signing their own death warrants. I had to say to somebody this past week, a couple weeks ago actually now, when I was talking to them about black allegiance to this country. And I said to them, look, the fact of the matter is, if any of you doubt that black people have tremendous patience and allegiance towards this country, then you're really fooling yourself, because the reality is we have given some of our best minds to this country, which has openly and in a hostile way have declared itself our enemies. This country, which was murdering and killing us, while it was simultaneously taking our ideas and using those ideas to enrich people who not only hated us but hated their own people. I mean, when we look at the fact that that George Washington Carver contributed to what has often been described as a revolution in production, which was the Henry Ford assembly plant. When we look at what that did for production, and black people didn't get a piece of that, we aren't even mentioned in the damn bylines. The fact that Henry Ford's crooked, Nazi loving piece of crap butt didn't come up with that, but a black man who was in every single aspect criminalized by this country except for his economic value. A black man came up with that. And yet our loyalty to this country, our loyalty to this country is being questioned. I mean, I told him, I go, that is rich, man. That's rich. Yeah, that is 100% rich. That is 100% rich. And it shows exactly why the ancestors are saying the hell with them. Now, as I, turning back to what we must prepare for family. And the reason why I'm doing this book list, I know I've been going on for the last 35 minutes. But the reason why this book list is important is because, family, we have to get our minds around the national aspect of who we are. And the fact that we have to now construct a picture in our minds of not only the nation state, but what we want the nation state to be, and how we fit into the nation state, and even more importantly, the historical ramifications of the nation state, and particularly run by the European. We are not cognizant anymore of the economic, the sociological, the philosophical, the I'll use them ones for right now. But we don't really psychological. There you go. That's the fourth one I was looking for. We aren't cognizant of how these things shape our lives anymore, because we have been so far. We needed it, family. Trust me when I tell you, we needed it. What metaphysics? We have been so far into the metaphysics that we have forgotten the physical. We are not prepared to take over the physical like we should be. We have 10 years of preparation. There is a period of transition. We are not just coming out of slavery in 2019, family. And there's a video that I actually seen a while ago, and the brother was doing this mathematics that was based on the Egyptian calendar, not the European calendar. And he said in that video, he said, even though it looks like we are coming out of slavery in uh, 2019, according to the Egyptian calendar, we technically aren't coming out till 2024, which is powerful because in 2024 there is another major solar eclipse that is going to be coming across the United States. I'm hoping that I'm still going to be in the region that I'm living in right now, because it's going to pass directly over me. That's going to be 100% up here. It's going to be like 90 something percent, 90, 98 or 99%. So I can't wait. I'm hoping that I'm still here to be able to see that. Um, I'm, like I haven't moved or anything, because I'm very excited about that. So 2024 is when he said we would actually be coming um, out of slavery. Now, this is powerful too, because in 1992, which was around the time when, Bobby Hemmett came out, Phil Valentine came out, that was 500 years since Columbus sailed. And the Dogon performed a ceremony in 1994, I believe it was, that had to do with with communicating with the soul of the earth. They did this like every 50 to 100 years or something like that. Now, interestingly enough, and by the way, let me jump back before I jump back to this. All right, so 2024 he mentioned was when we would um come out of slavery actually. So the transition period for us is between 20 20 2019 and 2034. So it's 10 years from each of these points. And in fact, the ancestors say it's more like 2042. So we got about 20 years before we are actually coming out of slavery. So the attempt to lock us down between that, and astrologically, family, this is there. This is there. Astrologically, this is there. Um, the attempt to lock us back into our position is going to increase during this 20-year period. So we, after 2021, which is that, or excuse me, after 2020, which is the second gateway from 2012, we are going to be entering a period of transition, which is going to last from 2021 to 2042, basically. Now, there is going to be stuff that happens along the way as our consciousness starts to expand, because our consciousness, not theirs, is going to expand. And Mulatto children especially are going to find it difficult as we move through these transition periods, as we move through 2028, as we move through 2035, as we move through 2042. Their consciousness is going to be expanding also, but with limitations, and they're going to have to choose who they're going to side with, and that choice is going to have terrible ramifications for whole entire genetic blocks. If they go against the ancestors, there will be hell to pay. There will be hell to pay. And the ancestors are showing me right now that there will be hell to pay. There will be destruction that comes their way. But it will reflect badly on the heritages in which um uh they are trying to purify. And what I'm talking about now is the white heritages. The black heritages will be spared from that reflection, but they too will take a hit. So in 1992, I think it was in 1994, the Dogon, excuse me, family, the Dogon did this. Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead. That's why I started coughing. Um, so the black heritages will be saved from this judgment, but those black heritages which are carried by those people who turn against the ancestors will be set apart so that they can be renewed as the earth is reborn. In other words, some of those natures which allowed for that for the ability for uh, that person to turn against the ancestors, those things have to be still parsed out. They have to still be cleansed. So a new generation will come into existence which will cleanse those things. And if that generation isn't able to cleanse them, that line will be wiped away. That line will be wiped away. This is going to be stuff that comes up, especially as we move into the Third World War, which could be very, very devastating to this planet. Hopefully we can. This is another reason why I'm here, family, is because we have the keys. We have the keys to being able. We have the key. They told me, they were like, pick it up. So we have the key to being able to stop this, or at least to being able to make it less impactful, so it doesn't kill as many people. This is where our minds come in. This is where our hearts and everything come in. If we aren't set right with our optimism, with our realism, we are going to encourage a full slaughter on this planet. A full slaughter. You're talking about billions of people slaughtered by these devils before they kill themselves out. We got to stop this. This is on us. So it's time to get educated at a level that is more physical than metaphysical. This is also why I'm going to be giving you these books today. Now, give me 1 second, family. Got to get some water. So, in 1994, and this is something that Bobby Hemmett used to talk a lot about, the Dogon, I believe it was 94, they did this ritual that they usually do every 50 to 100 years to communicate with the soul of the planet. That's how I interpreted it. Probably isn't what they were doing. But here's the funny thing about this, family. I didn't come across this information till about 2024, 2014 and 2015. So I didn't come across him talking about these things until then. And here's the messed up thing about that. In 1994, I was a country boy. Young country boy, too. I knew nothing about the Dogon. I knew nothing about what was happening in Africa. But in the spring of 1994, family, I woke up, and I'll never forget it, and the world was different. Now, learning what I've learned about African initiations and what happens when you start coming of age and how your mind changes and I'm not talking about Western science now. I'm talking about African initiations. There are things that rites of passage that you go through where your mind and your eyes and everything change. There's a part of me that said, okay, well, I was like, hitting puberty and what have you, and so maybe that's what it had to do with, but no, family. The world changed significantly. And as soon as I heard him talk about the Dogon, I knew that's what it was. Because leading up to the Dogon's whole ritual, the Native Americans were trying to get the white man to change. The Native Americans were meeting with the white man from the middle of the 80s through the beginning of the 90s, trying to get the white man to change, trying to get him to turn away from the path that he was on, trying to get back, as Phil Valentine talked about in an early lecture, trying to get back their headdresses and artifacts that would have helped them set the world to another pace so they could essentially save the planet. The white man, being so greedy, said no. The Dogon had to report this back to the spirit. And the Dogon did. And then the Dogon had to transfer what the spirit told them into vibratory frequencies that went around the world. What I picked up was that frequency. Now, there were a multitude of other rituals. They were small rituals. People wouldn't have even recognized them as major rituals because they were hidden within other rituals. This is how Africans do it, family. They hide rituals inside of other rituals. So you'll be doing a ritual that you do every single year, but there's a different ritual that's hidden in it from the ritual from the last 2 years or the last 10 years or the last 15 years. And there's always these things that are going on. So there were preparatory rituals. And by the way, they stack rituals. So you may do the same 10 rituals, small rituals inside this ritual in a row, for 10 years straight. But the reason you're doing those rituals are different. So then there's a ritual that is stacked on top of that other ritual, which is already hidden inside the major ritual. So they had to do preparatory rituals. In preparation, some of them were specifically Dogon, others were timed to coincide with other rituals within other African tribes and other tribes around the world. So they had to do these rituals in preparation. And every time they did a ritual in preparation, there would be a communication from other people doing similar rituals and from the spirit itself. And by the time they got to the point of 1994, where they did the ritual, the major ritual, it was pretty well understood by all involved that the world was not going to be saved by the likes of the European. Now we are coming up, let me see. We are coming up in 42. In 42. If it's every 50 years that they do this, I think there's a 25-year one too. Don't quote me on that. But if it's every 50 years, then in 2042 we're coming up to their other one. Now, as part of the Dogon and the Congo, there's multiple Congo groups, but as part of their rituals in the early 90s, in the mid 90s, they were calling out to us, family. They were calling out to us. Part of the evolutionary process that was engaged in by people like Phil Valentine, people like Bobby Hemmett, even Bro Panic presently, and others like him. A lot of this came from them calling out to us on a spiritual level. And they had been doing this since the early 1900s, but it had increased after World War II. it had increased after World War II. And there was a video that Philippe Shock Matthew actually posted with one of our great elders whose name escapes me right now. It wasn't James Small. I think it was Leonard Jeffries. I think it was Leonard Jeffries, where he was somewhat talking about this. It's a 2.5 hour long video. It's almost a 3 hour long video, family. It is well worth it. If I remember to actually note it and get it, I will post it on the bottom. Give me 1 second. Let me write it down. All right. So he actually talks a little bit about this, about that spiritual essence of the civil rights movement, which was in Africa, which we didn't actually see come into existence. And it seems, or until much later, it seems that the whole concept of the non-alliant, of the non-allied, no, there's an actual, the third world. It seems that the whole third world concept came from their spiritual work, or the spiritual work that he was talking about. It's a very powerful video. Anyway, so starting in the 1970s, according to the ancestors, many tribes in Africa started doing, especially after it was evident. Okay, let me back up. They're giving me so much here. Malcolm he actually touched base with a couple of people in Africa that were part of these tribes that were giving out prophecies to major Black American figures. And so he understood his role in the process of unifying Africa when he went to Africa and unifying Africa with African Americans. Elijah Muhammad never got that. Elijah Muhammad was stuck too much in the esoteric where he never got that. And Malcolm was supposed to be the guy who took over the Nation of Islam. It was going to take it to another height, but it's another story. Martin met with some people from Africa and got similar prophecies in the early part of the 1960s, but he was too busy to really integrate them until the middle part of the 1960s. When it became evident to these tribes that the white man was actually going after the people who were supposed to craft and mold this new configuration for this planet, they changed their strategy. They started doing many things differently in their rituals to contact us spiritually. So that they could develop a power base with us, a spiritual power base, to motivate us to move forward with this process without us being cognizant of where that motivation was coming from. Now, the white man tried to stop this. This was crack, ladies and gentlemen. I've said it before. That was a psychological warfare substance. That's why it was called crack. This bull crap that, it's called crack because it cracked in your head once you took it. Seriously. Crack was developed primarily as an addictive substance, but then they saw its psychological, it was meant to, they saw its psychological value, and it was meant to deteriorate the spiritual essence of the person so that they would only be massive consumerists. And that was the whole role of crack. It was to really push them into hyper consumption. Now, consumption for them was going to lead to death. That was the hope. But what was later observed and what was later devised was that what it did was it fragmented the psyche in the spiritual essence so badly that the person became locked out of their genetic essences, and that's fragmented terribly because it's a net, ladies and gentlemen. When I talk about your genetic essences, it's a net. When you're in a family, it's a net. So when you lock one person out of that, that's literally ripping apart those structures. And so now that causes tremendous psychological, spiritual pain to happen. And all of this willful fluid, which is given to us as family members and given to us as communities, that starts to leak all over the place. It starts to, the family values, the family system loses its vitality and starts to die. And that was the goal of crack. That became what crack was about. That also, at a very diabolical level, was meant to separate us from Africa. That was meant to separate us from Africa and to push the allegiances of those people who wanted to help our community, but watched helplessly as our community descended downward, spiraled downward. It was to push their allegiances towards white people. Now, I don't know if white people understood all this was happening, because most of the time white folks are just the puppets. They're not the puppet masters. They're just the puppets. So I don't know if they understood all this was happening, but that was part of what crack was supposed to lead to, and it did. It stopped us for a time from receiving en masse the codes from Africa. It stopped us en masse from receiving the codes from the earth and from the ancestors. It stopped us and prevented us on just many levels from maturing and growing beyond where we were in the early 90s. The problem is now that many of us who had been detached via this onslaught, because the last 25, 30 years has just been an onslaught of ripping apart our families, our communities, and what have you. Many of us are starting to come into our own and say, we want back what was taken from us. And a lot of the anger that we're feeling presently is rooted in that. A lot of the anger is rooted in that. So, as we move towards this I don't know what to really call it, family, this awakening, this broader awakening, there's going to be a lot of motivation and stirring in the other realm, not in the other realm, but on the other side of the tracks, to keep us locked down, because we are starting to develop within ourselves, family, an idea that this society is not going to be saved. It's never going to look at us as forget about equals. That is never going to just treat us well. And so we're about to break out, as it was. And when we lose our optimism for white people can tell that. And it makes them very, very scared. Because as I said in other videos, we are the ones who have been standing before them in their destiny. Whenever the ancestors have said, let me at them, I'm tearing these mofos apart, we've stepped in and said, let's not do that. Let's not do that. We've stepped in and we have saved them so many times. And the ancestors, as angry as they were, understood why we did it. The white man got used to us doing that. And even now, with so many of us having children with them, they are taking the fact that we are willing to give our vital essences to them, that we are willing to loan our genetics to them, as a sign of them being safeguarded and them not coming under the same judgment as those around them. The problem is, most of these people are deliberately taking these children away from us and keeping them for themselves so that they can imprint their essences, their genetic essences, their supposed brilliance onto these children, so that then they can come back and continue the cycle of white supremacy. The ancestors are not allowing this to go unnoticed. They are willing to absolutely devastate these colored people who are in essence white on the inside, just because they are going against the ancestors. They are not playing with them. I think it was it Dave Chappelle who told the joke where he said, my granddaddy was married to a white woman, and he would say, he couldn't wait for the race riot or for the race war to begin because the first people he was killing was his wife and his children to let them crackers know that he wasn't playing. There's a reason why that was said. It isn't about black people going and slaughtering their own children. It is an ancestral message. If those children aren't raised right, if they are not acting on behalf of the ancestors, if they are not acting correctly on behalf of the ancestors in the community and the vision of the ancestors, then the ancestors are going to rip them apart. And the ancestors understand, look, it's not necessarily these children's fault. Their souls have been smothered. I get that. Yes, the ancestors get that, but the ancestors still ain't playing with them. The ancestors still ain't playing with them. And there's actually a book that I didn't pull down, and I feel stupid that I didn't pull it down because it is a powerful, powerful, powerful book, family. It is, give me 1 second. Let me get this book. All right. So, yeah, so this is the book. And I'm sad, I'm always saddened to say that I don't always have as many African-centered books as I want, and I need to grow my list. But this is one that I bought a couple of years ago, and it is definitely well worth it, family. That's the title of the book. This is something that all of us should have in our homes. It is, we talk a lot about spirituality. We talk a lot about, sorry for the cover there. But we talk a lot about spirituality. We talk about our African heritage and what have you, but most of us aren't really familiar with our African heritage. And this book right here, The Afterlife is Where We Come From. This was written, if I'm not mistaken, by a European, and it is, yeah, the afterlife. People like to talk about the Bible, family. It is more and more African books are starting to make their way to this country, and I think it's because the doors are opening finally because of commerce. But there are hundreds of books that were written, probably even a couple thousand of books that were written from the late 1950s to the early 1980s that deal with African spirituality in a manner that would blow our minds. The more and more, I only have a few books, okay, on African spirituality. I only have a few books like this, okay, only a few, and that's unacceptable to me. I wanna get about another 50 to 100, but just from the few that I have and what I've seen, I recognize that, Bobby Hemmett people like Bobby Hemmett, who I love the man. He was good, but man, we needed somebody there with the passion of Bobby Hemmett. Bobby Hemmett was doing massive research into metaphysics. We needed somebody similarly there who was doing massive research into this stuff. Because Bobby Hemmett, I have, from the list that I have gathered from watching his lectures, the man probably gave me, I'm not lying about this, family. I think he gave me, and I've only watched maybe I'd say under a fourth, maybe even a fifth of his lectures. He has given me probably 400 or 500 books, book titles, maybe more, probably more. And I'm talking about just book titles. He's referenced tons of movies, some of which I've written down, most of which I haven't. But I've often thought about, if we had somebody dedicated to Black spirituality for those 20 years, who had the same passion and the same connection with the people as Bobby did, as Brother Hemmett did, man, we would be able to rewrite the Bible presently without even thinking about it. And maybe ultimately that's what the ancestors intended, is now that we've had 20, 30 years of Bobby Hammond, Phil Valentine, you know, Bro Panic, the rest of them going around the country doing this work, maybe now we are ready to get somebody who's willing to do the major work and dive into the hundreds, the thousands of books that are available about our people in Africa, because Europeans are reading this stuff, family. They are reading this stuff. I have been absolutely shocked, with how many of these books are written by Europeans and how many of these books are out there. And that means if they're out there, Europeans are reading them, Europeans are writing them. Some of them we are writing, but a lot of them are European based. They're writing them. So they're doing massive research into who we are. And we aren't paying attention, family. We aren't paying attention. Now, you know, I have my issues sometimes with the brother named Gus T. Renegade. I have some major issues sometimes with the brother, but he used to say something a lot. And the man used to speak tons of truth, but he's changed a lot in the last like 3 years. Especially since our mother Frances Cress Welsing went home to the ancestors. We still miss her. But he used to say constantly and consistently that Europeans do more research on who we are than we do. They know more about who we are than we do. And a book like this, and I had another book over there I was going to grab too. Let me grab that. In a book like the 3 that I'm holding right now, I grabbed 3 of them. Ancestors weren't even playing about this. They wanted these 3. Tells me that we need to get serious about who we are, because family, you know, they've been teaching us not to read so they can hide information. Let me say one more thing before I actually start talking about these books, because this is actually very important. There were rules that the Moors had, and a lot of these rules were tied to epics. And the epic, I know epics are typically longer, but how the Moors described epics were much shorter than how we describe them today. There were actually like 2 or 3 levels of epics, but the lowest level occurred in a lifetime, and sometimes several of them occurred in a lifetime, depending on the astrological fata that was actually available and the astrological energy that was available. What the ancestors told them about this time, and what they have been able to confirm through their dealings in mysticism and their dealings with oracles from around the world, is that we are in a revelationary time. We have to remember that. Revelation means the uncovering, the unveiling, the showing of what was behind, or what was hidden, should I say. Not what was behind, but what was hidden. And so one of the rules of this era is that all of this material has to be made available to us. And it was supposed to be made available to us so the consciousness of the planet could grow to an extent. And you could actually see the beginnings of this in the 1960s. It was supposed to be made available so the consciousness of the planet can grow to the extent where we would be liberated, completely liberated from dealing with each other on a violent level. So then we can ascend this planet and we can join the Galactic Federation, if I can use that phraseology. Basically, it's not the Galactic Federation as we see it, but it is the higher vibratory frequency of our cousin planets. We now reside in a place of deadness, except for Jupiter. Every other planet has life, but the life is on a higher vibratory frequency. Even the supposed sun has life, but it's on a higher frequency. Earth is supposed to be reintegrated into the higher essences of that vibratory frequency. And that in that way, we would join the Federation. Now, that's the first level Federation. The second level Federation is far beyond what we need to worry about right now. But that's what all this was supposed to be for. That's the preparation for all this. And the fact that we are getting so much that is being released in book form is to stay true to this necessity, but also to obscure it so you don't know what actually to buy. You can get everything today. The problem is most of it is worthless. And most of us aren't asking the questions trying to figure out what we actually do need. So a book like this one, like the one I showed you about the afterlife, is one that we need. It's one that we need. But most of us are into reading stuff that is not going to feed us spiritually. It's not. The ancestors are ready to turn us away from that because we have been made terribly materialistic, family. We have been made terribly materialistic. And trust me when I tell you, materialism isn't about the computers. It's not about the cars. No, even though they've made us love their wealth. They made us hate ourselves and love their wealth. Remember Kanye said that? Here's the problem. What they told us was wealthy isn't wealthy. It's material. And the materialistic, which we are now in love with, is the thing that Bobby Hemmett was telling us not to be afraid to let go of. And not to be sad that it's going to be coming to an end. Now, it's not necessarily about the planet dying, because oftentimes I think that's what he was talking about when he talked about the destruction. It is about this way of living. It is about this way of living. It is this employment, this wage, this concept of being stuck. That's the materialism. That's the materialism. So they want me to get a move on with these books, so let me talk about them. So books, so I already showed you this one. Another book about a group of Africans, which I love because it's kind of, I really love these people, and I wonder sometimes if my genetics came from them. This book is called The Forest People. And the top, you can see there the author. Okay. This book I've bought it. I think I bought this up before, but if not, this guy actually has a lot of stuff written on Black psychology. I've bought a few of his books. This though, this is well researched. This is shockingly well researched. And when I talk about us needing people who are as young and vibrant and hungry for things like psychology and sociology and history, to the level that Bobby Hemmett and Phil Valentine were hungry and wanted to know about metaphysics. And there's a message that they just gave me that I gotta deliver to you. We needed that. And with a book like this tells me what people like that could have been contributing to our community at the same time that people like Bobby Hemmett and them were given 4 and 5 and 6 and 8 hour lectures. We should have simultaneously had psychology lectures, sociology lectures, economic lectures that were 4 and 5 and 6 hours long. Should have been. So here's the message. There are many of you who are listening who are hidden occultists. You have been doing occult work for a long time, and you're good at it. You're really good at it. It is your job, under secrecy from the ancestors, to protect those who are doing the work of the ancestors that are out front. It's your job to protect them. You don't have to do it, loudly, but you do have to do it, and they will pay you for it. Trust me, they will pay you for it. That's the message that just came to me. Okay, so this is the book, Black Adolescents. Now, family, this is the author, okay? Reginald L. Jones. I want you to take a look. Look at how thick that book is, okay? Sorry, let me put it like that. Look at how thick that book is. This is a well-researched 400-page book on Black adolescence. There was another one that I didn't get, which I'm going to be getting probably towards the end of the year. Black adolescence. You want to know why they have the pulse of your young people? You want to know why they have the pulse of the young people in the Black community? This is a 430 plus page book on nothing but Black adolescence, and it is well researched. I want to show you I want to show you this. This is the end of one of the chapters, okay? This is the end of one of the chapters. All right? Let's see if you can see that. See references? Okay? Now, that doesn't look like a lot, right? Page 2 and 3 of references, okay? All right? And then page 4 and 5. And that's all I ain't even gonna show you because there's one more page. Okay? This is one of the books that you don't know exists about you. Sorry, family. Had a little mix-up, had a little something happen there. But this is one of the books that you don't know that exists about you. But I guarantee white psychologists, well, not white psychologists, maybe not today. This is an older book. But I guarantee a lot of the people in power know that this book exists. This came out in 1989. 1989. And then I was listening to a brother some time ago, and you want to talk about, man, this cat was bad, man. I can't remember his name. His last name was Muhammad, though. This cat was bad. Ooh, was he bad? And he's one of them brothers that read a lot of non-metaphysical stuff, and he gave massive amounts of bibliography. I got probably 8 or 9 books that he mentioned in one like hour-long piece that he did. And this is one of the books. It is called The Making of Black Revolutionaries by James Forman. This is actually something that Black people need to read because it talks about kind of an alternative narrative when it comes to the civil rights movement and why a lot of Black people moved to become revolutionaries. This is a long book, people. This is not a short book. Give you an idea. This is 500 pages. Not a short book, okay? But it's an important book nonetheless. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop this video because I've been going for over an hour and 17 minutes, and then I'm going to pick it up and actually just dive into giving you nothing but books, okay? I'll see you on the other side.